Lochdu had never needed much excuse to gather in a field and argue about tradition. A stretch of grass, a row of bunting, a tea-urn with a mind of its own, and suddenly every small opinion in the village became a matter of heritage. This year's Highland Games were meant to be a proud day. Strength, music, raffle prizes, and old rivalries pretending to be friendly. But something was off before the first race began. A cracked brass whistle gave a tiny double chirp when blown, as though the games themselves had developed a nervous stammer. And in Lochdu, a small, odd sound can travel farther than a shout. If you enjoy a mystery with gossip, warmth, and one very observant policeman, settle in. Chapter 1, Practice Day, Proud Day. The bunting went up badly, which was always the first sign that the Lochdu Highland Games were beginning properly. It snapped and twisted in a bright, cold wind that came skimming off the loch, catching the tartan flags and making them flick like impatient fingers. On the shinty field, men who had not run anywhere in years walked about with clipboards, giving advice to younger men who were carrying poles, chairs, rope stakes, trestle tables, and expressions of private suffering. The annual games were, according to the printed leaflet, a joyful celebration of Highland fellowship, local skill, music, and community spirit. According to everyone actually involved, they were 3 days of lifting things, losing things, arguing over things, and pretending no one was angry. Hamish Macbeth stood near the entrance gate with his hands in his pockets, watching Mrs. Wellington direct 2 boys carrying a banner. "Higher on the left," she cried. "It is higher on the left," said one boy. Then, "Lower, on the right." "That's the same thing." "It is not the same thing when one is attempting dignity." Hamish smiled faintly. His dog, Lugs, had already found dignity too exhausting, and lay beside the rope barrier like an old hearthrug abandoned by a careless owner. Sunsy, Hamish's cat, had slipped into the committee tent 10 minutes earlier with the air of one attending a private appointment. Constable Macbeth. The voice was keen, young, and slightly too loud. Hamish turned and found PC Kieran Ward coming across the grass with a notebook in his hand and a high-visibility vest already fastened, though no one had asked him to wear it. He was a clean-faced young man with sandy hair, polished boots, and the unfortunate posture of someone trying to look useful in all directions at once. "Kieran," said Hamish, "you found the field, then?" "Yes. Excellent community footprint," said Kieran, writing something down. Hamish looked at him. I mean, good local engagement opportunity." Inspector Blair said, "I was to observe, assist, and avoid creating unnecessary paperwork. That last part will be the hardest." Kieran laughed, then stopped when he saw Hamish had not. "I've made a preliminary note of risk points," said Kieran. "Parking, alcohol, competitive equipment, cash handling, public announcements, crowd movement, livestock proximity." "There are no livestock." "There's a sheepdog display." "That is not livestock. That is a man shouting at a dog while sheep make their own arrangements." Kieran made another note. From the committee tent came the hiss of a tea-urn, the scrape of folding chairs, and the kind of brisk female voices that had kept Scottish institutions alive long after male committees had talked themselves to sleep. Isla Patel was setting raffle books into a biscuit tin. She was a neat, composed young woman with dark hair pinned back, a pencil behind one ear, and the haunted expression of someone responsible for other people's small sums of money. Beside her, Fiona Macbeth, the games secretary, was checking a list on a clipboard. Fiona was in her early 50s, trim, well-dressed in a practical waterproof coat, with silver-streaked hair and a smile that always seemed ready for a photograph. She had the smooth manner of a woman who believed any disaster could be managed with laminated signage and a firm tone. "Hamish," Fiona called. "You're not standing about, are you?" "I was hoping to." "Splendid. You can stand about by the parking area. Visitors are not to park on the west verge. Last year, a man from Dingwall blocked the pipe band. Aye, it was a mercy for some." Fiona gave him a look that said, "Jokes were welcome only after the games were over and all receipts had been reconciled." A car came slowly along the track by the field, large, silver, and too clean. It stopped near the tent. A man got out, wearing a dark coat too fine for mud, brown shoes too polished for grass, and a scarf arranged as if it had been negotiated with a mirror. He was in his 40s, handsome in a thin way, with quick eyes and the smile of someone who expected to be disliked and intended to make that useful. "That'll be Mr. Pike," said Fiona, with brightness placed over tension like a cloth over a stain. Julian Pike, visiting sponsorship broker and newly appointed modernizer of the Lochdu Highland Games, came towards them looking at the field as though assessing a property that had failed to appreciate his arrival. "Fiona," he said, kissing air near her cheek. "There we are. Authenticity. Wind, mud, improvised infrastructure. Sponsors do adore texture when it can be controlled." Mrs. Wellington, passing with a stack of hymn books inexplicably intended for the prize table, stiffened. "Controlled?" she said. Julian smiled. "Presented. That's different," said Mrs. Wellington. "In London, perhaps," said Hamish. Julian turned his smile on him. "And you are?" "Hamish Macbeth, local policeman." "Ah, excellent. The community face of public reassurance." "He's the policeman," said Mrs. Wellington. "Faces are extra." Kieran stepped forward. "PC Kieran Ward, Community Engagement Support." Julian looked pleased. "Good. Very good. We must all be professional. This event has enormous potential if we can smooth out the amateur edges." At the word amateur, 3 men tying the tug-of-war rope stopped tying it. Fiona said quickly, "Julian has been helping us secure outside sponsorship, the new banners, the improved programme, the tourist shuttle." "And proper brand placement," said Julian. "Though we'll need to talk about the signage. At present, it's sweetly old-fashioned." "Sweetly," repeated Mrs. Wellington, in a voice that removed all sweetness from the word. At that moment, a whistle sounded from the shinty pitch. Or rather, it tried to. There was a faint, double chirp, like a sparrow changing its mind, followed by a proper brass note. Everyone turned. Old Archie Munro, games marshal and retired postman, stood with the starter's whistle in one hand. He grinned through his white moustache. "Still works?" he called. "Still complains first," said one of the rope men. "It's cracked," said Archie. "Been cracked since the year Sandy Massiva dropped it into the soup. Gives 2 wee peeps before it remembers itself." "It should be replaced," said Julian. Archie looked at him, as if Julian had suggested replacing the loch. "It's the game's whistle. That doesn't make it fit for purpose. It starts the races." It appears to hesitate. "Some of our runners do too." There was laughter. Even Fiona smiled, though quickly. Hamish watched Julian's eyes. The man did not enjoy being laughed at unless he had arranged it himself. Sunsea emerged from beneath the committee table with a bit of sausage in her mouth and a look of untroubled accomplishment. Isla noticed and began to protest, then laughed despite herself. "Honestly, Hamish, your cat has fewer manners than some of the committee." "And better timing," said Hamish. The wind snapped the bunting again. Somewhere beyond the field, the loch shone pewter under a racing sky. For a moment, the games looked as they always had. Untidy, beloved, proud, and ridiculous. Then Julian Pike took out a pen and began making notes. The laughter thinned. Chapter 2. The Raffle Tin. By noon, the weather had decided to stop being decorative and become personal. Fine drizzle came slanting across the field, needling faces and darkening the edges of the grass to mud. The tea urn hissed steadily in the committee tent, making a noise like a disapproving aunt. Damp coats steamed from chairbacks. The biscuit tin containing raffle books and cash sat on a folding table beside a stack of paper plates. Isla Patel counted the money twice, then a third time. Her face changed very little, which told Hamish more than a gasp would have done. "What is it?" he asked. She glanced towards Fiona, then towards the tent flap, where Julian Pike was speaking to a sponsor's representative from Inverness, a woman in a quilted jacket with a clipboard and an expression of polite endurance. "Nothing," said Ela. Hamish waited. Ela lowered her voice. It's light. How light? Not empty. Just wrong. Fiona heard the word wrong as if it had been shouted. She came over at once. What is wrong? Isla looked miserable. The raffle cash. I had the count right yesterday. I wrote it down. There should be more. Maybe you miscounted. I didn't. Fiona's smile appeared. It was the smile she used when something was approaching disaster and she wished to greet it politely. We'll check before we worry. Julian Pike ended his conversation and drifted over. Check what? Nothing serious, said Fiona. That phrase, said Julian, almost always means something serious. Ela closed the tin. We're reconciling raffle tickets. May I? Fiona hesitated. Julian lifted the lid before permission had fully formed. He looked inside, then at the ticket books, then at Isla. Who has access to this? The raffle committee, said Fiona. Which is? Isla. Myself. Archie. Sometimes. Mrs. Wellington, if she remembers where she put her spectacles. And the treasurer. Julian gave a small sigh. This is precisely why informal cash handling damages sponsor confidence. Isla flushed. No one has stolen anything. I didn't use that word. You arranged your face around it, said Hamish. Julian looked at him. Constable, if there is a discrepancy, there must be a responsible process. Aye. Usually it begins by not making a young woman feel like a criminal in front of the tea urn. Kieran, who had been hovering near the tent entrance, stepped in eagerly. Should we secure the area? I can ask everyone who handled the tin to provide statements. No, said Hamish. But Kieran had already turned to the queue outside, where several people were waiting for tea. Could anyone who touched the raffle tin since yesterday please remain available for questioning? Silence fell. Then, because Lochdu's silence lasted only long enough to sharpen itself, everyone began speaking at once. Questioning? Who said anything was missing? I bought 5 tickets off Ela yesterday. Did you get the pink stubs? Or the blue stubs? There are no blue stubs. Are the Patels short of money? Mrs. Patel, who had just arrived carrying a tray of pakoras wrapped in foil, went still. Isla's flush deepened. Hamish stepped outside. Kieran! The young constable turned, pleased to be needed. Stop helping. I thought, that's the danger. Kieran's ears reddened. Julian closed the biscuit tin with 2 fingers. This is unfortunate. Very unfortunate. I'll have to advise the sponsors that governance safeguards are inadequate. Fiona drew herself up. Julian, we do not need outside alarm over a small counting issue. Small issues are where rot begins. Old Archie, who had been wiping mud from his boots near the tent pole, muttered, Rot begins when folk call volunteers staff. Julian heard him. Volunteers are still accountable, and outsiders are still visitors, said Archie. Hamish moved back to the table and picked up one of the raffle books. He did not look at the cash first. Money made people emotional. Paper was calmer. A strip of stubs had been removed from the middle of one book. Not torn raggedly, not ripped in panic, but separated cleanly along the perforation. Someone had taken care. Ela, he said quietly, who sold from this book? I did. Then Fiona took it for an hour when I went to help Mum in the shop. Then it came back. Fiona said, I sold perhaps 12 tickets. Maybe less. I was called away to discuss the programme. With who? With Julian. Julian shrugged. Briefly, Hamish looked down at Julian's shoes. They were spotless. The field had become mud around every entrance, yet his shoes showed no trace of it beyond a neat darkening at the sole. You've been checking the field? Hamish asked. All morning. Not the west side? I delegated. That would keep the leather safe. Julian smiled. One learns to dress for weather without surrendering to it. Behind him, Mrs. Wellington whispered to the woman beside her, That is exactly how Satan would talk about shoes. The whisper was not quiet enough. It rarely was. Kieran wrote something in his notebook and looked as though he regretted existing. The drizzle thickened. Outside, The bunting drooped. Inside, the tea-urn spat, the raffle tin sat shut, and a small private worry had become public property. Hamish caught Isla's eye. She was trying very hard not to cry. That troubled him more than the missing money. In Lochdu, money could disappear, tempers could rise, and gossip could be forgiven if it became boring enough. But shame was different. Shame found a chair in every kitchen and sat there long after the kettle had boiled. Chapter 3. A Man Who Needed to Win. That evening, the Red Lion smelled of beef stew, wet wool, peat smoke, and old grudges warming themselves for sport. The rain had settled into proper weather, steady and thick, drumming against the windows and making the pub feel both cosy and trapped. Men who would compete in the heavy events sat with pints and discussed knees, shoulders, and the decline of younger men. Women from the committee occupied the long table near the fire, sorting rosettes into colours and pretending not to listen to everything. Hamish sat at the bar with a glass of ginger beer he did not want, watching the room in the mirror behind the bottles. Lugs lay under his stool, asleep with the offended patience of a dog dragged indoors from better smells. Kieran stood near the darts board, trying to charm two fishermen by asking whether the games had always had this adorable local intensity. The fisherman looked at him as if he had asked whether their dead mothers were decorative. Julian Pike sat at a small table with mineral water and a leather folder. He managed to drink water loudly, which Hamish had not known was possible. Fiona sat opposite him, her hands folded tightly around a cup of tea. Brand alignment, Julian was saying, is not an enemy of tradition. It is how tradition survives in a competitive visitor market. Archie Munro, passing with a plate of stew, said, "Tradition survived before markets learned to talk." Julian gave him the smile again. "And yet here we are, needing sponsorship." That landed. A few faces turned away. Dougie Fraser came in then, filling the doorway before he entered. Dougie was the local strongman, though he was not as young as he pretended, nor as fit as his reputation required. He had enormous shoulders, a beard like wire wool, and a limp he disguised badly when people were watching. He ran a small haulage business, sponsored the caber toss in his late father's name, and liked to say he did things for the village when he meant he liked being thanked. "Evening," he said. The room answered with a warmth that was not quite unanimous. Julian looked him up and down. "Mr. Fraser, I wanted a word about your sponsor board." Dougie took off his wet jacket. "What about it?" "The logo is rather local. It's a local business." "Yes, but the games are aiming higher this year." Dougie's face hardened. "My father's name has been on that board 20 years, and that history is valuable," said Julian, with the air of a man placing a flower on a grave before building flats over it. "But presentation matters. Some brands can look a little low-class beside national partners." The pub changed temperature. Dougie set down his jacket very carefully. "Low-class?" Fiona said quickly. "Julian means consistency." "I mean sponsor hierarchy," said Julian. No offence intended. "When folk say that," said Archie, "they've generally brought offence in a bag and started unpacking." Kieran stepped forward. Perhaps everyone could remain calm. No one had been moving until then. Dougie looked at him. "Who are you?" "PC Ward. Community engagement." "Engage somewhere else." A few people laughed. Kieran's face reddened again. Julian did not laugh. He looked pleased. A public temper was useful to him. Hamish saw Fiona lean across the table and whisper, "Not here," Julian answered in a normal voice. "If Mr. Fraser wants a childish scene, better now than tomorrow." Dougie took one step towards him. Hamish moved, without seeming to hurry, and placed himself half in the way. "Dougie," he said mildly, "your stew's getting cold." "I haven't ordered stew." "Then that's the first sensible thing to do." Dougie breathed heavily through his nose. Then he turned to the bar. "Stew," he said. "With bread?" asked the landlord. "With a shovel." The pub let itself breathe again. Julian closed his folder. "This is exactly the difficulty. Informality becomes entitlement. Entitlement becomes chaos. Fiona's smile had gone thin. Julian, you said there was something about the accounts. Yes. He tapped the folder. There are missing raffle funds, inconsistent ticket stubs, and some troubling patterns in prize allocations over the last 3 years. I'll audit everything in the morning. Mrs. Wellington, from the rosette table, stiffened. Prize allocations? Nothing for you to worry about. That is what men say when women should begin worrying at once. Ela, who had come in with her mother to deliver food for the volunteers, stood near the door. Hamish saw her hear the word missing and shrink a little. Julian saw it too. He did not soften. I am not here to indulge local sentiment, he said. The sponsors want confidence. If that means replacing certain committee roles with professional management, then so be it. Fiona went pale. Kieran tried again. To be fair, professionalisation can be positive. Mrs. Patel looked at him. Young man, if you make one more cheerful remark, I will feed you to the urn tomorrow. I'm sorry. She means you'll get tea, said Hamish. Probably. Julian stood. I want a late walk through tonight. Start positions, timing points, announcers stand sightlines, no mistakes, no surprises. Fiona blinked. Tonight, before the field opens. I won't have tomorrow undermined by old habits. The rain will test the infrastructure. Archie snorted. It'll test your shoes. Julian ignored him. Fiona looked towards the window, where rain shone in the orange pub light. I suppose I can meet you at the field. Midnight, said Julian. Bring the schedule file. That's very late. It's very necessary. Hamish watched her. She agreed too quickly. Later, as the pub settled back into talk, Dougie sat alone over his stew, stabbing potatoes as though they had insulted his ancestry. Isla and her mother left early. Kieran wrote in his notebook, then crossed something out with unnecessary force. Hamish stepped outside for air. The rain smelled of wet grass and chimney smoke. Across the dark, the shinty field lay hidden except for the pale flutter of bunting at the gate. Behind him, laughter rose from the pub, too loud and too relieved. Hamish had seen villagers do this before. They laughed when something had nearly gone wrong, because laughter let them pretend it had not gone wrong already. Chapter 4. The announcers stand. Dawn came grey, low, and reluctant. Mist clung to the shinty field in torn strips. The bunting hung soaked and limp. The announcers' wooden stand, set near the finish line, rose out of the damp like a small, foolish gallows built for local announcements and lost umbrellas. The body of Julian Pike lay at the base of it. There was no dramatic pool, no outcry from the sky, no theatrical arrangement. Only a man in a dark coat lying at the wrong angle on wet grass, one polished shoe twisted under him, his scarf muddied, his folder open nearby with pages softened by rain. It was the stillness that was worst. A place meant for shouting had gone quiet. Hamish arrived before the crowd could form properly, though not before word had begun moving. Word in Lochdu did not need roads. It passed through curtains, back doors, early dog walkers, and one phone call to a woman who could not keep anything in her head without giving it to 3 others. Kieran was already there, pale but upright, trying to hold people back from the rope line. Please remain at a respectful distance, he was saying. This is an active scene. Of course it's active, said Mrs. Wellington. Half the village is in shock. I know what you mean. Don't wave your notebook at grief. Hamish went to the body, crouched, and looked without touching. Rain had blurred much, but not everything. The stand's bottom step was slick. The side rail bore a faint smear of green, not grass green, but the brighter shade of prize ribbon dye. One plank near the second step sat slightly proud, as though recently shifted and put back badly. He straightened. Archie Munro stood nearby, cap in his hands, old face drawn tight. I found him, Archie said. Came to check the lines. Thought it was a coat at first. Did you touch anything? No. You did well. I didn't feel well. That's different. Archie gave him a bleak little look of gratitude. The first police car from Strathbane arrived too fast, sliding slightly in the mud. Detective Chief Inspector Blair emerged as if ejected by rage. He was large, red-faced, already sweating despite the cold, and carrying a cigarette he had no intention of respecting the scene with. "What in God's name has happened now?" he roared. "A man is dead," said Hamish. "I can see that, Macbeth. I have eyes." "Aye. But they get lonely without thought." Blair glared. Kieran looked as though he had swallowed a button. Blair stamped towards the stand, then stopped when his shoes sank into mud. "Tourist fellow, is it? Sponsorship man?" "Julian Pike," said Hamish. "Local savagery," said Blair, looking around with satisfaction. "These games bring out primitive instincts." Mrs. Wellington, who had edged too close, said, "If primitive instincts were fatal, Chief Inspector, several committee meetings would have emptied this village years ago." "Get her back," Blair snapped. Kieran moved. Mrs. Wellington moved him with a look. Blair crouched near the stand, puffing. "Could be accident. The plank's been loosened. Could be bad maintenance. The tool marks are fresh." Blair's eyes brightened. "Murder, then!" He said it not with horror, but with ambition. Hamish disliked him more for that. "Who hated him?" Blair demanded. Several people answered at once. That was the trouble. Julian Pike had been in Lochdu only a short time and had achieved the efficiency of a nettle. "Dougie Fraser threatened him," said one man. "He insulted Dougie's father's sponsor board," said another. "He accused the committee of stealing," said Isla's mother. "He was going to audit Fiona," whispered someone. Fiona McBean stood beyond the tea-tent, one hand at her throat. She looked shocked, and she looked observed. Hamish had learned there was a difference. Blair rounded on Kieran. "You, trainee. Who's the obvious suspect?" Kieran opened his mouth, shut it, then opened it again. "There was a public confrontation with Dougie Fraser last night." "Good. See, Macbeth? Even the bairn can do policing." Kieran looked miserable at the praise. Hamish walked around the stand. The announcer's platform was reached by 3 wooden steps. The second step had been loosened from beneath, not broken from above. A man climbing in bad light, wet rail in one hand, folder in the other, might put weight on it and fall hard. But why climb? He looked at the rail again. Green dye. Rosettes were still stacked in the village hall the previous night. They had not been handed out. Had someone carried one here? Or had ribbon been caught on a sleeve? Near the base of the stand, half pressed into mud, lay a small torn corner of paper. Hamish lifted it with a twig and placed it in an evidence bag before Blair could trample it. It was part of a timing sheet, softened by rain, with a printed column headed Start. Blair saw him. "What's that?" "Paper." "I know it's paper. I didn't want to rush you." Blair's face darkened. The mist shifted. People stood in clumps now. Volunteers, competitors, villagers, all looking at one another with a new caution. A games field was not meant to contain death. It was meant for foolish pride, cheering, grudged applause, and tea too strong to refuse. Julian Pike had disturbed Lochdu while alive. Dead. He did something worse. He made everyone remember what they had said about him. Chapter 5. Canteen slop, field soup. The canteen at Strathbane police station had learned to remove hope from food. Hamish sat with a plate of grey mince, boiled potatoes, and peas the colour of old paint, while Blair paced at the front of the briefing room and treated certainty as a substitute for evidence. "Fraser," Blair barked. "Big fellow. Temper. Public humiliation. Threats in front of witnesses. We get him in, we squeeze, we close fast." Kieran sat beside Hamish, back straight, notebook ready. He had written Dougie Fraser twice, and underlined it once, then added motive, with a question mark so anxious it nearly tore the paper. Hamish pushed a potato with his fork. "You not hungry?" whispered Kieran. "I'm considering whether it died in vain." Blair slapped a file onto the table. "Macbeth, you'll stop mooning about village feelings and bring me something useful. This is a career case." For Julian Pike, it was more of an ending. Don't get smart. I'm rationing it. Blair leaned over the table. You always do this. You always complicate simple things because you can't bear a proper investigation. A proper investigation would include the stand, the timing sheet, the whistle heard at midnight, the raffle shortage, Fiona McBean's accounts, and Julian's late walk-through. Blair stared at him. Whistle? A dog walker heard the starter's whistle around midnight. 2 wee notes, and then the proper note. Kieran perked up. The cracked whistle, Blair pointed at him. Don't encourage him. But Kieran, eager again, said, It does seem relevant, sir. If the whistle was used at midnight, that could indicate someone staging a practice start. Blair frowned. Or some drunk fool playing games. At the games field, said Hamish. With the game's whistle. At the time Julian asked for a walk-through. Blair waved the thought away because it had not originated in him. Fraser could have done that. Dougie would blow a whistle as if trying to start a war. The dog-walker described the cracked double chirp. So the whistle was kept in the marshal's box, inside the committee tent. Who had access? Committee. Fine. Arrest the committee. Kieran almost wrote that down. After the briefing, Hamish escaped before Blair could assign him another plate of Canteen despair. By mid-afternoon he was back in Lochdu, where the rain had thinned and the village had resumed motion in the way communities do after shock. Badly, but with tea. Mrs. Patel had made lentil soup and insisted Hamish eat at the small table in the back of the shop. It was warm, fragrant, and honest, with bread thick enough to restore faith in flour. You'll clear Isla, she said. I'll find what happened. That is not the same sentence. No, said Hamish. But it's the one I can stand behind. Mrs. Patel sat opposite him. She had flour on one sleeve and worry around her eyes. She has worked so hard for those silly tickets. She wanted people to see she could be trusted. Some still look at us as if we arrived last Thursday with pockets full of other people's coins. You've been here 20 years. Exactly, only 20. She gave a small shrug. In Lochdu, that is still the beginning of a visit. Hamish said nothing for a moment. From the shop front came voices. Someone asked for milk. Someone else lowered their voice when Isla answered, which was worse than speaking loudly. Kieran entered the back room carrying a clipboard and a face full of purpose. Lugs followed him, then flopped at Hamish's feet and fell asleep halfway down, as if even gravity had become too much trouble. I've interviewed 3 volunteers, Kieran announced. I may have inflamed one of them. Which one? The one with the trombone. We've no trombone at the games. Then I may have interviewed the wrong man. Mrs. Patel covered her mouth. Hamish looked at Kieran. Sit. Eat soup. Stop improving things. Kieran sat. Mrs. Patel placed a bowl in front of him with the severity of a judge. Between spoonfuls, Kieran said, Fiona McBean told me Julian threatened to replace her. Are ye? With a professional event manager. He said sponsors disliked uncertainty. Fiona mentioned that before? No. She said it was private committee pressure, not relevant to the death. Then she said everything is relevant to the death, and could I forget she had said not relevant? Hamish smiled faintly. That sounds relevant. Kieran looked pleased, then cautious. Should I not have asked? You asked quietly? Yes. In the shop? No. Outside. Good. Kieran relaxed a fraction. Mrs. Patel said, Fiona likes to be needed. So do many people, said Hamish. No. Fiona likes to be needed in public. That was well put. Hamish finished his soup. Outside, a pale stripe of light appeared beneath the clouds, silvering the wet road and the shop windows. Lochdu looked softer in it, almost innocent. But innocence, Hamish thought, was not the same as goodness. Villages could be kind. Villages could be cruel. Often they did both before breakfast and called it concern. Chapter 6. The Whistle and the Timings. The committee tent had acquired the air of a sick room. The tea-urn still hissed, but more quietly now, as if it too understood someone had died. Clipboards lay on the table in fanned stacks. Stopwatches sat in a biscuit tin beside spare pencils, safety pins, old rosette labels, and the cracked brass starter's whistle. Hamish picked up the whistle. It was warm from someone's hand or from the tent itself. A simple thing, polished in places by years of use, dull in others. Near the mouthpiece ran a fine hairline crack, nearly hidden unless turned to the light. "Careful," said Archie Munro. "That whistle has started more races than you've had hot dinners. I've had some cold dinners that lasted longer." Archie gave a reluctant smile. Kieran stood near the table, trying not to touch anything. He had learned something, at least. Fiona McBean arrived with a folder pressed to her chest. "I hope this won't take long," she said. "People need direction. If we cancel everything, the village will collapse into speculation." "It's already doing well enough," said Hamish. She ignored that. "The games can continue in modified form. No announcers stand, obviously. We can use the small microphone from the hall." "Obviously," said Kieran, then looked ashamed of himself. Hamish opened the timing folder. "There's a practice start log last night." Fiona's hand tightened on the folder. "Yes, just tidying paperwork." "At midnight?" It had been a long day. Paperwork doesn't usually need a whistle. She blinked. "What?" A dog walker heard the starter's whistle around midnight. The cracked note. "2 wee peeps, then the proper blow." Archie leaned in. "Who had my whistle?" Fiona frowned. "It was in the marshal's box." "Was the box locked?" asked Hamish. "Not locked. It never is during setup. People need things." "Which people?" "Committee, marshals, volunteers." "That's generous." "It's practical." Kieran cleared his throat. "Security protocols might have prevented." "No," said Hamish and Fiona together. Kieran closed his mouth. Hamish examined the timing sheet. A line had been added in neat blue ink. 11:55 p.m. Practice. Start. Stand. Sightline. Check. Initials. F.M. "Your initials," said Hamish. "Yes." Julian insisted everything be recorded. "I wrote it afterwards." "Afterwards?" "I mean, after arranging it." "With him?" "Yes." "You went to the field." Fiona hesitated just long enough. "I walked as far as the gate. The rain was awful. Julian said he could manage the sightline check himself. He was very particular." "Did you give him the whistle?" "No." "Who did?" "I don't know. Perhaps Archie left it out." Archie bristled. "I put it in the box after practice. Same as always." "Same as always," said Fiona, "is rather the problem." Archie looked wounded. Hamish saw it. Fiona did too, but she did not apologize. That interested him. A woman who lived on public goodwill usually tended it carefully. "Tell me about the raffle," said Hamish. Her face tightened. "Must we mix every unfortunate thing together?" "Murder often refuses to keep tidy categories. The raffle shortage is embarrassing. Nothing more." Julian thought otherwise. Julian enjoyed thinking otherwise. "And the missing stubs?" She looked away. "Isla must have misplaced them." Kieran shifted. Hamish could feel him wanting to speak. He did not. "Neatly?" Hamish asked. Fiona gave him a cool look. "Young people can be neat, Hamish. So can older ones." The tent flap opened, and Mrs. Wellington entered with a plate of scones wrapped in a tea towel. "I brought these because grief is not an excuse for shop biscuits." No one argued. She set the plate down, then looked at the whistle in Hamish's hand. "That thing sounded last night," she said. Hamish turned. "You heard it?" "No." Mrs. MacLeod heard it while walking that ridiculous terrier of hers. "She told me this morning, and I told her not to tell everyone." "Did she?" "Of course. But she did it badly, so I thought you should have the accurate version." Fiona's lips pressed together. "What time?" Hamish asked. "Near midnight. 2 little chirps. Then the blast." Mrs. MacLeod thought someone was starting ghost races. "Did she see anyone?" "Mist and rain. She saw a light near the stand. That's all," Fiona said. "Julian had a torch. Did you see it?" "No. He told me." Hamish placed the whistle back on the table. Outside, a weak sun found the wet bunting and made each drooping strip shine. The field was trying to look festive again. It had not earned it yet. Hamish took a scone, Kieran whispered. Is this allowed? Food? At a scene. In Lochdu, said Hamish. Refusing a scone can destroy more trust than mishandling a witness. Kieran took one at once. Fiona watched them both, her face arranged into patience. But her thumb moved along the edge of her folder, back and forth, wearing at the cardboard. A small habit, Hamish thought. A worried one. Chapter 7. Hamish's Big Mistake. The village hall kitchen was built for endurance, not comfort. Flour dust hung in the air. Sandwiches were being made at a pace that suggested feeding sorrow might keep it from speaking. Raincoats dripped from hooks. The kettle boiled, clicked off, and was immediately switched on again by someone who trusted nothing electrical to remain useful without supervision. Isla Patel stood at the end of the counter, slicing cheese with too much care. Every conversation near her became softer when she moved, then louder after she passed. It was meant to be kind. It was not. Hamish came in through the side door, shaking rain from his coat. Isla, he said quietly. Could I have a word? She wiped her hands. Now? Aye. Her mother looked up from a tray of pakoras. With me? With Ela first. Mrs. Patel did not like it, but she knew Hamish well enough to let him have the moment. In the small storage room off the kitchen, between stacks of paper cups and a folded badminton net, Hamish kept his voice low. I need the raffle book you were using. And any notes you made on the count. I gave them to Fiona. All of them? No. She took a folded sheet from her pocket. This is my own count. I didn't want to lose it. Good lass. She looked at him sharply. Do you think I took it? No. Then why do I feel as if everyone is waiting for you to say I didn't? Because they were. Hamish took the paper. Until I sort this, it may be better if you stay away from the raffle table. Her face closed. So I look guilty. You look protected. In a village? That is the same shape from a distance. He knew then he had said it wrong. I'm trying to keep Blair from making a show of you. I'm already a show, he see-hill. Isla, no. Take the paper. Take the book. Take whatever makes people feel clean. She pushed past him and went back into the kitchen. Kieran stood just outside the storage room, holding a tray of sandwiches and looking stricken. You heard? I didn't mean to. That is becoming your life's motto. I thought you were securing evidence. Hamish closed his eyes briefly. Do not say that sentence to anyone. Kieran nodded. 5 minutes later he said it to Blair. He did not mean harm. He meant efficiency. Blair had arrived at the hall demanding updates, and found Kieran in the corridor with the tremulous eagerness of a puppy carrying a dangerous object. Macbeth has secured evidence from Isla Patel, Kieran reported. Blair's face lit up like a match dropped into paraffin. By tea-time, half the village knew Isla's raffle book had been taken. By 1:15, the story had improved itself. Isla had been questioned. By 1:30, her mother had been asked in the shop whether the family needed support. By 4:00, the sponsor's representative had approached Fiona and asked, in a tone designed to be gentle and therefore devastating, whether the Patels were reliable enough for cash duties. Hamish heard about that last part from Archie, who was angry enough to forget he was sad. They said reliable. Archie spat. As if she was a ladder. Hamish found Blair outside the hall, smoking near the drain, and looking pleased with the activity his presence had caused. You had no call to name Isla, said Hamish. Blair blew smoke sideways. I named no one. I merely asked why evidence was being removed from her possession, in front of Mrs. MacLeod. She was standing there. Mrs. MacLeod could hear a secret through a mattress. Blair grinned. Not my fault, if your little village likes gossip. Hamish's voice stayed soft, but something in it thinned and sharpened. You used a young woman's good name because you had nothing better in your pocket. Blair's grin faded. Careful, Macbeth? No. You be careful. You roar about justice and leave folk picking bits of themselves out of the mud after you've gone. Kieran stood near the doorway, pale. Blair looked from Hamish to Kieran and back again. Your trainee seems to know more about procedure than you. He knows less about people. That can be cured. In your case, it is set. For a moment, Blair looked as if he might explode. Then the sponsor's representative appeared at the door, and he converted rage into authority. I'm pursuing all lines of inquiry, he barked. Aye, said Hamish. Mostly the ones with women standing at the end looking ashamed. Inside, the sandwich-making continued with a terrible brightness. Isla worked without looking up. Her mother stood beside her, back straight, daring anyone to pity them. The Curry sisters, Nessie and Jessie, sat at a corner table folding napkins. Nessie's gossip was usually brisk and sharp, a social weather vane. Jessie's was slower, more mournful, as if every rumour had disappointed her personally. I always said raffle work was a burden, said Nessie. You said it was an honour, said Jessie. It can be both. It usually is, when Fiona asks. Hamish heard that and turned. What do you mean? Nessie looked pleased to be useful, and afraid of being blamed for it. Fiona asks, in a way that makes no sound like betrayal, Jessie nodded, and then thanks you in public, so you can never resign. That was true enough to sting. Hamish looked across the kitchen at Fiona, who had just entered carrying more rosettes. She greeted people, touched an elbow here, corrected a stack of cups there, and received sympathy with modest discomfort. A pillar of the community, everyone would say, but pillars could cast long shadows. Later, Hamish found the person who had helped count the cash the previous night, Alistair Gunn, a retired bank clerk who now took pride in writing labels with a fountain pen. He lived alone, kept his garden clipped to military obedience, and disliked excitement unless it had been scheduled. I counted nothing, he said at once. No one said you did? You implied it by standing there. Hamish leaned on the gate. Alistair, a man is dead and a lass is being shamed. Alistair's mouth trembled. Just once. I won't be dragged into it. Into what? He looked past Hamish towards the village hall. Being the next one spoken about. There it was. Fear, not guilt. Or guilt wearing fear's coat. Hamish walked away with little more than he had come with, except the knowledge that shame had begun doing the murderer's work. Chapter 8. The Easy Villain. By the time Blair decided Dougie Fraser was the answer, the village was ready to agree. It was comforting, in a grim sort of way. Dougie was large, loud, proud, and had been insulted in public. He had a temper people could see, which made it easier to ignore the quieter kinds. He had argued with Julian Pike in the Red Lion. He had left early. He had the strength to loosen a plank or shove a man or do any number of things people imagined strong men doing when they forgot strong men also had knees, mothers, mortgages, and the flu. Blair found him at the field edge near the caber practice area, where Dougie was pretending to inspect equipment while actually avoiding everyone. The wind had risen. Bunting snapped flat. The cabers lay on the grass like felled trees, awaiting accusation. Fraser! Blair shouted. Dougie turned slowly. If you shout louder, maybe the dead man will answer for me. Blair smiled. Temper again. Good. Hamish, standing behind him, winced. Kieran whispered. Is he allowed to say good? No. Should we stop him? You first. Kieran did not move. Blair jabbed a finger at Dougie. You threatened Julian Pike. I did not. You stepped towards him. I stepped towards most things. I'm large. You were humiliated. Dougie's face darkened. My father was insulted, and you couldn't stomach that. Could you? I ask the questions. That must be nice for you. A few villagers had gathered despite themselves. Archie, Mrs. Wellington, 2 of the tug-of-war men, Nessie Curry, who had come to return a bowl to no visible person. Blair sensed audience and grew broader. You had motive. You had strength. You knew the field. So did every person here. but not every person here looked ready to tear Pike in half. Dougie's hands curled. Hamish stepped in. "Dougie," he said, "where were you after 11? "At home." "Anyone with you?" "No." Blair snorted. Dougie's jaw worked. "I put my knee up. It was bad after shifting the cables." "Convenient," said Blair. "It wasn't convenient. It hurt. Did anyone see you?" Dougie looked away. That hesitation fed the crowd. Hamish saw it pass from face to face. Not proof, but shape. The story fit. Dougie became easier to see as guilty because the village had already rehearsed his anger. "Who saw you?" Hamish asked. Dougie muttered. "Morag Macleod." Several people made small noises. Mrs. Wellington said, "Oh." Morag Macleod disliked Dougie Fraser with the clean energy of a woman whose fence had once been reversed into by his lorry and never properly repaired. She would not lie to save him if he were dangling over a well. "She brought liniment," Dougie said, staring at the grass. "For the knee. Said if I was going to make a fool of myself at the games, I might as well smell medicinal." Blair looked annoyed. "Time?" 11:30. Stayed until after midnight, because she was telling me everything wrong with my kitchen curtains." Hamish sent Kieran to check. Kieran ran, grateful for an errand not involving speech. While they waited, Blair continued pressing. "You had access to tools." "I have my own tools." The stand plank was loosened with a spanner from the committee box. "How would I know that?" "You sponsor the cabber. That doesn't make me a joiner." "You knew Pike was going to the field." "No, I didn't." Hamish watched Dougie's face. Anger, embarrassment, pain, not fear in the right place. Kieran returned, slightly breathless. "Morag confirms. She was with him from approximately 11:30 until 12:20. She says his curtains are, and I quote, a disgrace to a bachelor and a warning to society." A small laugh broke from someone. Dougie closed his eyes. Blair rounded on Kieran. "Approximately? She was very precise after finding her diary. She also says Dougie could barely stand without swearing." Dougie said, "I could stand. Not according to Morag. She exaggerates. She said you cried once." "I did not cry." Liniment got in my eye. The laugh spread, gentler this time. It did not clear him in their hearts at once, but it cracked the picture. Hamish said, "Dougie didna have access to the committee toolbox. He didna know about the midnight practice start, and he couldna have used the cracked whistle from his kitchen while Morag was insulting his curtains." Blair looked furious. "Someone could have used him," he snapped. "Made him look guilty." "Aye," said Hamish. "That's more likely." Dougie looked at him. Something like gratitude crossed his face, awkward and unwanted. "Don't look at me like that," said Hamish. "You still need better curtains." Dougie snorted. As the crowd drifted, Nessie Curry murmured to Jessie, who had appeared as if pulled by gossip on a string. "Well, if it isn't Dougie, we're back to people with manners." Jessie sighed. "That's always worse." Hamish heard and agreed. Visible anger was rarely the most dangerous thing in a village. It spent itself noisily. Quiet desperation saved its strength. Chapter 9. Sunsy's Little Find. Hamish's cottage had developed a damp patch shaped like mainland Scotland. He stood in the kitchen looking at it while the kettle made a sulking noise, and refused to boil with conviction. His fuse box had tripped twice that morning. His socks were wet. His fire smoked when the wind changed. Domestic life, he thought, had a gift for reminding a policeman that murder was not the only form of human trial. Lugs occupied the one dry chair, sprawled in a sunless patch as though claiming ancient rights. He opened one eye when Hamish entered, judged that no food was involved, and returned to sleep. "You're a great help," said Hamish. "Lugs say had." There came a scratching at the door. Hamish opened it. Sunsy came in carrying something small in her teeth. Tail high, paws muddy, face full of importance. She crossed the floor, stepped over a puddle forming from Hamish's coat, and dropped her prize on the mat. It made a faint, metallic tick. Hamish bent. A tiny brass ring lay there, nicked and slightly bent. At first he thought it was from a keychain or a bit of fishing tackle. But then he saw the curve of it, the worn edge, and the smear of old polish, a mouthpiece ring, from a whistle. Sunsy sat and washed one paw, having completed her civic duty by accident. "Where did you get that?" Hamish asked. Sunsy looked at him with the blank serenity of cats who do not answer questions from tenants. He picked up the ring with a cloth. The brass was scratched, and at one side a minute crack ran through the lip. His mind went back to the whistle in the committee tent, the faint double chirp, Archie's pride, the midnight sound, Fiona's thumb worrying the folder edge. The kettle finally boiled as if it had been waiting for drama. Hamish took the ring to the station, then to the committee tent, where Archie was packing away marker flags with the mournful care of a man tidying after a family quarrel. "Archie," said Hamish, "where's the starter's whistle?" "In the box." They opened it. The whistle lay among stopwatches and safety pins. Hamish lifted it and turned it to the light. The hairline crack near the mouthpiece was no longer simply a crack. A tiny piece of the mouthpiece ring was missing. Someone had forced it, bent it, perhaps trying to pry it open or clean it or fix it. The ring Sunsy had found matched the gap. Archie's face tightened. "Who damaged it?" "That's what I'd like to know. It was whole yesterday." "Are you sure?" "It was cracked, aye, but not broken. There's a difference between an old wound and a fresh insult." Hamish liked that. Kieran arrived with a file under his arm and mud on one trouser leg. "I found something," he said, then paused. "Should I say it quietly?" "Progress," said Hamish. Kieran lowered his voice so much Archie had to lean in. "Alistair Gunn admits he helped count the raffle money. He says the amount was correct before Fiona took the tin to the office." "Why didn't he say?" "He was afraid." "Also, he says Fiona once got him reappointed as flower show treasurer after an unfortunate incident with Marrow judging, and he didn't want to seem disloyal." Archie muttered. "That woman could make gratitude feel like rent." Hamish placed the brass ring beside the whistle. Kieran stared. "That's from it?" "Aye. Where did you find it?" "Sunsy brought it." Kieran blinked. "Your cat found evidence?" "My cat found metal. Evidence is our vanity." "Where?" "That's the question." Hamish went back to the cottage and followed Sunsy's likely routes, which was like reconstructing the thoughts of smoke. She hunted along the lane, near the hall, behind the committee tent, and by the old wall where discarded wrappers collected. In the mud near the wall, Hamish found a small depression where something metal might have lain, and beside it a thread of green ribbon caught on a thorn, the same bright green as the smear on the announcer's rail. Rosette green. Fiona had carried rosettes that day. So had others. But Fiona had been in charge of the prize-giving room, the rosette box, the timing file, the raffle tin, and the polite pressure that made volunteers obey while believing themselves thanked. Hamish stood in the lane, while the wind shifted and brought the smell of wet grass from the field. The crooked whistle had spoken twice, once as a joke in daylight, once in the rain at midnight, and now, by losing a piece of itself, it had spoken again. Chapter 10. The prize-giving room. The village hall was full because the games mattered, even ruined, perhaps especially ruined. People came in damp coats and polished shoes, with children told to be quiet and old men determined not to be. The trophies stood on a long table at the front, beneath a banner that read, "Community, Tradition, Pride." Someone had tried to straighten it and failed, so Pride drooped slightly lower than the rest. Tea moved through the room in white cups. Scones appeared on plates. Conversations rose, fell, and stopped whenever Isla Patel crossed the floor. Her mother sat beside her, hands folded, chin lifted. Fiona Macbeth stood near the trophies with a stack of envelopes and the programme folder. She looked tired, but composed. A woman carrying on. A woman everyone wanted to admire, because admiring her meant the village had not misjudged itself. Blair arrived late, breathing hard, smelling faintly of smoke and wet wool. He came in with 2 officers, and the air of a man who believed doors were invented for his entrances. "What's this?" he demanded. "Prize-giving? Community stability," said Kieran before he could stop himself. Blair stared at him. Hamish stood near the front. "Before the prizes, I need one last clarification. A murmur ran through the hall. Fiona smiled. Hamish, is this necessary now? Aye. People have been through enough. They have. That's why we should stop letting them go through the wrong thing. Blair moved forward. I'll handle this. You'll stand there and try not to smoke indoors. A few people coughed into cups. Blair's face reddened. Macbeth! Hamish's voice remained mild. Chief Inspector, if you start roaring, Mrs. Patel may feed you to the urn. Mrs. Patel said, The urn has standards. This time the laugh helped. It loosened the room, then left it attentive. Hamish picked up the cracked brass whistle from the table. Archie tested this whistle on practice day. It gave its wee double chirp. Then the proper note. Everyone heard it. Everyone knew it. Archie nodded. Solemn. Mrs. MacLeod heard the same sound near midnight. 2 wee notes. Then the proper blow. That matters because this was not just any whistle. It was the starter's whistle from the committee box. Fiona's eyes stayed on him. Hamish continued. Julian Pike was lured to the announcer's stand for a so-called practice start and sightline check. That practice start appears in the timing folder, logged at 11:55, with Fiona McBean's initials. Fiona gave a small, sad smile. I told you, Hamish. Julian insisted on tidy records. I wrote it down because he asked me to. Before or after he died. The room tightened. Fiona's smile faltered. That is a cruel question. No. A cruel thing was letting Isla Patel carry the stink of stolen raffle money. Blair seized the chance. Aye, and we still have questions for her. Hamish turned his head. His voice went soft and sibilant. You'll not shame that lass again in this room? Blair stared. For once, he did not answer at once. Hamish looked back to the hall. The raffle stubs were not stolen in a panic. They were removed neatly from the book. The missing cash was not one big theft. It was small sums, moved quietly. Payouts. Payouts, said Mrs. Wellington. Side bets, said Hamish. Not on the grand things. Wee outcomes. Who would false start? Who would win a heat? Which raffle prize would go missing and turn up later? Small greed wrapped up in tradition, until folk could pretend it was just a bit of fun. Voices rose. That's nonsense. Who was betting? Not me. I only put £2. The last voice stopped abruptly. Hamish waited. The room heard itself, Fiona said, carefully. This is speculation. It was, said Hamish, until Alistair Gunn confirmed the raffle cash was correct before you took the tin. Alistair, seated near the back, looked as if he wished to evaporate into his tie. Fiona turned on him, not with rage but disappointment. It was more effective. Alistair. He flinched. I'm sorry, Fiona, but the girl didn't take it. Isla's mother closed her eyes briefly. Hamish placed a torn strip of stubs on the table. These stubs hid the small payouts. Names, numbers, little agreements. You ran it with a man from Inverness, who thought the games were a soft place for soft money. You told yourself it helped. A few extra pounds here, a sponsor smoothed there, a volunteer kept sweet. The games survived, and everyone thanked you. Fiona's face had gone still. You don't understand what it takes, she said. There it was. Not denial, wound. Hamish said gently, Then explain it. Her eyes moved across the room. Committee members, old volunteers, people who had praised her, leaned on her, resented her, obeyed her. Do you know how many people say they love the games? She said. Everyone. Do you know how many turn up to clean the hall after? 6. Do you know how many complain about the programme, the prizes, the tea, the parking, the toilets? All of them. And if money is short, they look at me. If a sponsor leaves, they look at me. If a child doesn't get a rosette, they look at me. Mrs. Wellington said, quietly for once. Fiona. Fiona's voice sharpened. No. You wanted it kept alive. I kept it alive. With betting money? Said Archie. With harmless money. Julian didn't think it harmless, said Hamish. He was going to destroy us. Destroy you. Her mouth closed. Hamish lifted the whistle. You loosened the stand plank before the storm. using the committee toolbox. You logged the midnight practice start, so Julian would have a reason to climb the stand. You used the cracked whistle because Julian liked rituals when they could be branded, and because the sound would make the check seem official. But the whistle had been damaged. The mouthpiece ring came loose. He placed the small brass ring beside it. Sunsi found this near the wall behind the hall, where someone dropped it with a bit of green rosette ribbon caught nearby. The same die marked the stand rail. Fiona looked at the ring. For the first time, fear entered her face naked. "I didn't push him," she said. No one moved. Hamish nodded. "No. You arranged for weather, wood, and pride to do what you could not bear to do with your hands." Her voice dropped. "He laughed. At all of it. At us. He said we were provincial. He said once he reported the irregularities, no sponsor would touch us unless I resigned. He said people like me were the reason small places stayed small." Kieran spoke, unexpectedly gentle. "So you made him climb?" Fiona looked at the young constable as though noticing him for the first time. "I thought he'd fall and break an arm," she whispered. "I thought he'd be frightened, delayed, discredited. I didn't think—" She stopped because the next words would not help her. Blair stepped forward, eager now that the danger was past. "Fiona Macbeth, I am arresting you." Hamish moved back. He let Blair have the formal words. There were times when official noise served a purpose. As Fiona was led away, the hall did not erupt. It sagged. Isla began crying silently. Her mother put an arm around her. Archie sat down hard on a folding chair. Dougie Fraser stared at the floor, perhaps thinking how easily the village had tried to fit him into the shape of a murderer. Mrs. Wellington reached up and straightened the drooping banner. Pride rose level with community and tradition. It looked, Hamish thought, less like a correction than an accusation. Chapter 11. The games go on, differently. The next morning brought clear, cold light, the kind that made every raindrop on the grass look deliberate. The shinty field seemed almost innocent again. The bunting had dried into colour. The ropes had been reset. The announcer's stand was roped off, silent and stripped of authority. A smaller table had been placed near the finish line with a modest microphone borrowed from the hall and a handwritten sign, "Announcements here, if necessary." It suited Lochdu better. The games did not resume in full. No one had the stomach for full ceremony. But children ran races. The pipe band played. Tea was poured. The raffle was rerun with 3 people counting aloud, and Mrs. Patel watching with the expression of a woman prepared to audit God. Blair stood near the gate, telling a reporter from Inverness, "My team moved quickly." Hamish walked past. "My team," Blair repeated louder. Lugs, who had been lying in a patch of sun near the rope, opened one eye and closed it again, having judged Blair unworthy of full consciousness. Kieran stood beside Hamish, hands in pockets now rather than clutching his notebook. "I made a mess," he said. "Ah, yeah. I thought procedure would help." "It does. When it remembers. People are not forms." Kieran watched Isla laugh at something one of the children said. It was not a free laugh yet, but it was real. "I'll apologise." "Good. What if she doesn't accept?" "Then you'll survive the education." Kieran nodded. "Mrs. Patel may not. She'll accept eventually." "How do you know?" "She brought extra pakoras." Kieran looked relieved. Across the field, Dougie Fraser supervised the caber event from a chair, knee-wrapped, dignity partially restored. Morag MacLeod stood beside him, criticising his posture. He endured it with the air of a man who had learned there were worse things than being seen clearly. Archie Munro carried the cracked whistle in its box, though it would not be used again. He had tied a label to it in his careful hand. "Retired with honour." Hamish found Ela near the raffle table. "I owe you an apology," he said. She looked at him, wary. "I tried to protect you, and made it easier for folk to suspect you. That was my mistake." She was quiet for a moment. People wanted to suspect someone, she said. Aye, but I handed them a shape. Her mouth softened. You also gave me my name back. I'll make sure Blair says it out loud. She almost smiled. Can you make him say it nicely? I'm a policeman, not a miracle worker. Her laugh came then, small but clean. Later, Hamish did force Blair to say it. Not nicely, perhaps, but publicly. The sponsor's representative heard. So did Mrs. Wellington, who repeated it in 3 places with improvements. By afternoon, the games had found a chastened rhythm. Children ate sweets. Old men debated whether standards had fallen in the hill race. Someone left a parcel of scones on Hamish's doorstep by accident. Someone else repaired the loose hinge on his shed without mentioning it. The village, embarrassed by its own sharpness, began making kindness indirect. At the field, Sunsy sat near the whistle-box with feline satisfaction, as if guarding a relic she had personally defeated. Lugs sprawled in the sun-patch, belly exposed, paws limp, a creature entirely convinced that restoration meant finding the warmest place and occupying it without apology. Hamish stood at the edge of the field and listened. No crooked whistle sounded. No double chirp cut the air. Instead, there came ordinary noises. A child protesting a race result, cups clinking, a dog barking at nothing, Mrs. Wellington telling a man from Inverness that tradition did not require his approval to exist. The games had survived. Not unchanged, not pure, but alive. And in Lochdu, that was often the best anyone could honestly claim. Lochdu kept its games, but it lost a little innocence about what community can hide. The field dried, the bunting came down, and people went back to their ordinary work. Still, a few faces looked away from each other more often than before, and a few kind words had to be earned again. That crooked whistle had been meant to start honest races, as it always had. But its tiny double chirp became a truth marker, reminding everyone that the smallest flaw can carry farther than any shout. It is easy to wrap pride in tartan and call it tradition. Harder is admitting that good causes can still attract small greed, and that respectability is sometimes just a costume people fear losing. Still, the kettle boiled. Someone left leftover scones by accident. Dogs slept in doorways. Cats prowled as if they owned the place, and comfort returned quietly, so nobody had to argue with their pride on the way in. When a close-knit community goes wrong, what do you think starts it more often? Money, pride, or the wish to look good? Thank you for spending this mystery in Lochdu, where even a village celebration can hide a sharp edge beneath the bunting. If this story kept you company, I hope you'll join me again for another quiet case, another difficult truth, and another cup of tea in the Highlands.